All right, before we jump into the tutorial, take a look at what's on the screen because this card instantly feels premium. We're on a clean, dark background with a perfectly centered UI card that floats subtly thanks to a soft shadow and smooth, rounded corners. Inside the card, these beautiful gradient waves are slowly rotating, blending purples, blues, and cyan into this fluid, glassy motion that feels calm, modern, and alive. Each layer moves at a different speed, so the animation never feels repetitive or mechanical. On top of that motion, everything stays clean and readable, with a crisp SVG icon, a bold role title, and a subtle username, all perfectly centered with clear visual hierarchy. The typography is modern, the spacing is intentional, and the contrast is spot on. It's lightweight, smooth, and built entirely with HTML and CSS. No JavaScript, no heavy assets. Yet it looks like something straight out of a high-end portfolio or dashboard. And in this video, we're going to build this exact animated card from scratch, step by step. So let's get started. But before starting, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for new videos. So let's start now. In this example, we are starting with the body of our HTML document. Inside the body, everything is going to be centered on the page because later our CSS will take control of that layout. The first thing we see inside the body is a div with a class of eCard and another class called playing. This div is acting as the main container for the entire card. Everything you see visually will live inside this one element, so you can think of it as the outer shell of the design. Inside that card, the first child is a div with a class of image. Right now, this div does not contain any text or content. It is mainly there to be styled with CSS later, usually for visual or decorative purposes. After that, we have 3 div elements in a row, all with the class name wave. These are repeated on purpose. Each one represents a layered wave shape, and by stacking multiple wave divs, we can create a more dynamic animated background effect, later using CSS. That brings us to the end of this first portion of the HTML structure. Next, still inside our main card, we have another div with a class of infotop. This section is responsible for the content that sits on top of the animated background. Inside infotop, the first element is an SVG. This SVG is used as an icon. It is scalable, sharp at any size, and styled just like text through CSS. The SVG contains a single path element, which defines the actual shape of the icon that will be displayed on the card. Right after the SVG, we add a line break. This pushes the text content down onto a new line so it does not sit right next to the icon. Below that, we have plain text that reads UI/EX designer. This text is not wrapped in any extra tags, so it inherits styling directly from the infotop container. We then add another line break to separate this title from the name that comes next. Continuing inside the infotop div, we now introduce another div with a class of name. This element is used to display the username or brand name associated with the card. The text inside this name div reads Mike Andrew Designer. Because it has its own class, it can be styled separately from the rest of the text above it, such as having a different font size or weight. After the name div, we close the infotop container. At this point, all of the visible text content and the icon for the card have been defined. Next, we close the main eCard div. This marks the end of everything related to the card itself. Finally, we close the body tag. That completes the HTML structure for this layout. All right, everybody, now we move into the CSS and we will go through it from the top in order. We start by selecting the body element. The height is set to 100 viewport height, which means the body will take up the full height of the browser window. The display is set to flex, allowing us to easily center content. Justify content is set to center, which centers items horizontally. Align items is also set to center, which centers items vertically. The font family is set to inter, so all text will use that font if it is available. The background color is set to a very dark gray value, giving us a dark page background. Next, we target the eCard class. A margin of 100 pixels auto is applied, which adds space around the card and keeps it centered horizontally. The background is set to transparent, meaning the card itself does not have a solid background color. A box shadow is applied with specific offset, blur, and opacity values to give the card a floating effect. The position is set to relative so that absolutely positioned children inside this card can be placed relative to it. The width is set to 240 pixels, and the height is set to 330 pixels, defining the card size. A border radius of 16 pixels rounds the corners. Overflow is set to hidden, so anything that extends beyond the card edges is clipped. That covers this portion of the CSS. Next up, we style the wave class. The position is set to absolute, which allows these elements to move freely inside the card. The width is set to 540 pixels and the height is set to 700 pixels, making each wave much larger than the card itself. The opacity is set to 0.6, so the waves are slightly transparent. The left value is set to 0, and the top value is also set to 0. A margin left of -50% and a margin top of -70% push the waves upward and to the left. The background is a linear gradient at 744 degrees, transitioning from a purple color to a blue color at 60%, then to a cyan color. After that, we style the icon class. The width is set to 3 units, so it scales relative to the font size. The margin top is set to -1 EM, pulling the icon upward. Padding bottom is set to 1 EM to create space below the icon. Next, we move to the info top class. The text align property is set to center, centering all text inside. The font size is set to 20 pixels. The position is set to absolute so it can be placed over the waves. The top value is set to 5.6 M. The left and right values are both set to 0, centering it horizontally. The color is set to RGB 255, 255, 255, which gives us white text. The font weight is set to 600. Then we style the name class. The font size is set to 14 pixels. The font weight is set to 100, making it very light. The position is set to relative. The top value is set to 1 EM, pushing it down slightly. The text transform is set to lowercase, forcing the text to appear in all lowercase letters. Now we move into the more advanced styling and animation rules. First, we select the second and third wave elements using nth child 2 and nth child 3. For both of these, the top property is set to 210 pixels, pushing them lower inside the card. Next, we target wave elements when they are inside an element with the playing class. For these waves, the border radius is set to 40%, giving them a rounded organic shape. The animation property is set to wave with a duration of 3000 milliseconds, infinite repetition, and a linear timing function. After that, we define the default wave styling. The border radius is again set to 40%. The animation is set to wave with a duration of 55 seconds, infinite repetition, and a linear timing function. This slower animation applies when the playing class is not involved. Then, we specifically target the second wave when it is inside a playing element. The animation duration is set to 4000 milliseconds, making it spin at a different speed. Next, we target the second wave normally. Its animation duration is set to 50 seconds. After that, we target the third wave when it is inside a playing element. The animation duration here is set to 5000 milliseconds. Finally, we target the third wave normally and set its animation duration to 45 seconds. At the bottom, we define the keyframes called wave. At 0%, the transform property rotates the element 0 degrees. At 100%, the transform property rotates the element 360 degrees. This creates a continuous spinning effect for all wave animations. So that's the result we can see. And now that's the end of tutorial video for today. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video. Have fun.